Buenas noches, good evening, Her Excellency Ms. Carla Maria Rodriguez Mancia, Ambassador of Guatemala to the United Kingdom, ladies and gentlemen, members of the diplomatic corps here in London, good evening everybody, buenas tardes. My name is Victor Ugarte, I'm the director here at the Instituto Cervantes in London. It's a great pleasure today to open today's conference dedicated to Guatemalan author Miguel Ángel Asturias, whose work remains a cornerstone of Latin American literature. As you know, last year marked the 50 years since he was awarded with the Nobel Prize of Literature. Asturias played a pioneering role in shaping modern Latin American narrative, blending myth, social critique, and poetic language in ways that influence generations of writers well beyond the region. I would like to express our sincere thanks to the Embassy of Guatemala for their invaluable collaboration in organizing today's event. Finally, it's a pleasure to have today Juan Toledo, a distinguished expert in Latin American literature, who will guide us through the richness, depth, and lasting significance of Miguel Ángel Asturias' work, and also Adam Feinstein, who will be in talk with Juan Toledo at the end of his lecture, Toledo's lecture. Let me remind you the next events we have at the Instituto Cervantes in London, the next days. We have in February the 5th, we have the Mexican author Brenda Navarro. She will be presenting her book translated into English, Eating Ashes. His event is almost fully booked, but it's still some possibilities. Brenda will end her UK tour in London after presenting her book in the Instituto Cervantes in Manchester and Cambridge University with Carlos Fonseca. And February 10th, Tuesday, we have also here an evening with Mexican short movies organized in collaboration with the UNAM, Autonomous University of Mexico. And on Monday, 16th, we celebrate LGBTQ month, and we will screening the documentary Diosa at the Art Deco Cinema, the Garden Cinema. I don't know if you know this movie theater, very close to the Cervantes. It's a beautiful place, and we are collaborating with them. So I really recommend you to visit this beautiful cinema and also this movie. Thank you, and I give you the floor to the ambassador, please. Thank you very much.
I'm not that old. But maybe I don't need a microphone. Well, Mr. Victor Ugarte Farrerons, director of the Cervantes Institute in London, distinguished members of the diplomatic corps, esteemed scholars, and all dear ladies and gentlemen present today. I would like to begin by expressing our most sincere gratitude to the Cervantes Institute in London for the invaluable support provided to the Embassy of Guatemala in organizing this tribute. I have to confess I have a bit of a problem in speaking English when I am at the Instituto Cervantes. But I understand, yes, we are in London. And I hope that all of you speak Spanish. If not, you can learn Spanish. You don't. Well, there are lessons here in the Instituto Cervantes. So I wish you all, if you don't, you learn our beautiful language. It is an honor to address you today to pay tribute to Miguel Ángel Asturias, one of the greatest sons of our nation, Guatemala, whose work transcends borders, generations, and languages. To commemorate Miguel Ángel Asturias is to reaffirm our identity as Guatemalans, for within his writings converge our history, our myths, our contrasts, and our hopes. Miguel Ángel Asturias transformed the experience of his time, marked by dictatorships, exile, and profound inequalities, into universal literature. His style, inspired by Mesoamerican culture and the richness of our language, anticipated magical realism and created a unique literary universe populated by deeply Guatemalan characters and legends, from La Tatuana to Men of Maize. His complex journey reached its highest recognition in 1967 when Guatemala was brought before the world through the Nobel Prize in Literature awarded in Stockholm. 125 years after his birth, his work remains profoundly relevant, reminding us that reading Miguel Ángel Asturias is an act of memory, identity, and future. This tribute is above all an invitation to continue exploring that magical universe, one that was born profoundly Guatemalan but yet today belongs to the world. In this spirit, we extend our special thanks to Juan Toledo, whose lecture forms an essential part of the invitation today. Juan is a Colombian born translator, educator, and editor based in the UK, whose wide ranging background in chemistry, literature, and philosophy gives him a unique perspective on the intersections of culture, thought, and creativity. Over more than 2 decades, he worked for the British Council, first as a touring officer in the drama and dance department, and later as cultural manager in the arts division. He then directed Aculco Radio in Brixton, South London, for 5 years, continuing to foster cultural dialogue through media. Juan studied chemistry at the National University before pursuing literature, philosophy, and Hispanic studies at Birkbeck College, University College London. Today, he teaches and edits the bilingual cultural magazine Perro Negro, and co-founded CTR Radio, an online podcast exploring literature, culture, and politics. His contribution to this commemoration encourages us to continue discovering the depth and reach of Asturias' work, inviting each of us to immerse ourselves in a literary universe that, though rooted in Guatemala, resonates across the world. I also want to thank Adam Feinstein, who will be joining Juan Toledo. Adam is an acclaimed author, translator, journalist, and Hispanist whose passion is Pablo Neruda, and he is a specialist in the biography of Pablo Neruda. I met Adam this evening, and we were discussing about Pablo Neruda and Miguel Ángel Asturias presented a book together, Eating in Hungary. The two novel literature prizes were living in Budapest for a while and were going to restaurants and streets, and they narrate all their common experience in that wonderful city. So we are trying to convince the Instituto Cervantes and ourselves to make a further event on that. So today is an initiation for Adam. Besides his passion for Pablo Neruda, to think more about Miguel Ángel Asturias and their friendship, their long-standing friendship. So I understand that after this talk, there will be some drinks, band d'honneur, in the ground floor, where we will be happy to host you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. I'm not too the words by the ambassador in Guatemala has been far too generous. The reason for being here is because somebody else cannot be here. To be quite honest, I'm not an expert of Miguel Ángel Asturias by any standards. I'm a happy reader, as Borges would say, a very happy reader. I would like. The person who should be here, is some of you know it, some of it, people like Adam and Jason Wilson will know, should be Gerald Martin, who was a person who met Miguel Ángel Asturias when he was here in the UK, has been the translator of Men of Maize into English, and also now is finishing the biography of Mario Vargas Llosa. He's also the biographer of Gabriel Garcia Marquez. So there you are. You got Gerald Martin, somebody who collects Nobel Prize of Literature from Latin America. He should be here, but obviously it was impossible to get him here. So what I'm doing, as I said, I'm not an expert, I'm a happy reader. I'm going to present my version, a version of the reading of Miguel Ángel Asturias, fundamentally trying to convince you to go back and read the books by Asturias. Why? He's unique. Why? Everything started with him. Really, truly, seriously, if you think about magic realism and the big novels of Latin America, he was the first one. He was the first one who marked it completely. In which way? In many ways. His life is very interesting. He's born in 1899, the same year as Borges, and he has several similarities with Borges. Very different kind of approaches, but the whole thing about not necessarily identity, but the internationalism, the sort of kind of universality of Latin America. But Borges was an Argentine, a country was, you got the influence of Eastern Europe, Jewish traditions, the Spanish that doesn't come from Spain, whereas Asturias come, from the tradition of the indigenous people colonized by the Spaniards. It's a very different kind of background. And the preoccupations were different, but they were thinking about the same thing. What was the thing about it? The universalization of Latin America. So Asturias goes to Paris when he's very young, in the 20s. He goes to Paris. He studied anthropology with the French translator of the Popol Vuh. Many people know about the Popol Vuh, about the sacred book of the Mayas. Asturias then started to think, well, when he is in Europe, things started to happen. What kind of things started to happen? First, James Joyce escribed a novel like Ulysses, and that novel is fundamental. And this is Gerald Martin saying this is not me. Gerald Martin said that the Latin American novel, the boom of the Latin American novel, is basically Ulyssian in approach. He just discovered that some, I think let's start on this one. He just discovered that some Ulysses could be the method to do it. Ulysses published his book in 1922, the same year as T.S. Eliot publishes The Wasteland. What happened? It's after the First World War, and this sort of kind of Joyce is creating an anti-imperial novel written by a Catholic, a very global novel, a very sort of universal novel with all these kind of disgregations, playfulness, lack of cohesion, a narrative which is not linear, a narrative which is fragmented. And for many people in Europe at the time, that was kind of the end of the novel. We hear all the time that the end of the novel, the end of the music as we know it, the end of cinema. We tend to think that any kind of new avant-garde or new kind of method or new applications that exist, it will be the end of something, of any artistic sort of kind of endeavor. But it wasn't. People like Asturias realized that, well, look, if the Europeans think that this is the end of the novel, a cul-de-sac, no, this is the beginning for us. Who is us? We Latin Americans. And what is the project? The project is to bring the memories of Latin American people and the indigenous, in the case of Asturias, the indigenous people, into being. And he started, and this is a progression. The other thing to say about Asturias with Joyce, and this is me talking about that, is that there's a parallel, very clear parallel between them as writers. If you know the work of James Joyce, and if you read James Joyce, you read it in order. What is the order? Dubliners, a lovely book, which is a very fantastic narrative about Dublin. Okay, short stories. There's the last story is called The Dead, which is a fantastic story. I would recommend anybody to read it. Made into a film by John Huston with his daughter Angelica Huston. Then he became more experimental. He did The Portrait of an Artist as a young man. He became slightly more experimental. Then he does Ulysses, even more experimental. And then finally, Phineas Wake, which is illegible by all the standards. Has been translated into Spanish and many, but I don't know. I don't know how many people have read the book. How many people? Apparently, you need to read as a team or as a kind of group to make sense of it. So there was a sort of kind of journey into illegibility in the case of Joyce. My theory is that he hated the readers. He wanted to make it very difficult. He didn't like the readers. He wasn't like Nabokov saying, look, treating the readers with respect and kindness. No, Joyce was completely different. Asturias is very similar. If you read, for example, Leyendas de Guatemala that he wrote, it's a very nice book about what? Folklore, Guatemalan folklore. Mayans stories about, we're going to read one short excerpt of that. And then at the same time, this interesting thing, he had started to write Señor Presidente, Mr. President, which is a fantastic novel, but it's political. So he spends about 10 years writing that novel, but he cannot publish it. He published first Leyendas of Guatemala, which is very anthropological. With Señor Presidente, he does the jump. He finished the book in 1933, but he doesn't publish until 1943. So 10 years, and he publishes when he can do it, because otherwise there's repression, interdictatorship in Guatemala, and all this sort of stuff. If you read Señor Presidente, you are confronted with the beginning of magic realism, the serious beginning. And there's the other thing. With Asturias, you got the beginning at the end, because you could argue that Asturias is Guatemalan literature. And I am an admirer of somebody called Augusto Monterroso. I don't know how many of you know Augusto Monterroso, who is a fantastic super writer, completely on the other side of the spectrum, which you actually compare with, if James Joyce is the opposite of Beckett, one is verbose and things like that, and Beckett is the kind of the concise, silence, theater playwright and stuff like that. The same can be said about Asturias and Monterroso. Monterroso, his first book was Obras Completas. That was the first story. He's created with one of the shortest stories ever written, El Dinosaurio. Y cuando despertó, el dinosaurio aún estaba allí. 7 words. The second shortest, the other short is one Hemingway. That short story has more translation than Quixote. Translate that into English. Cuando despertó, el dinosaurio aún estaba allí. And this is Monterroso thinking about, okay, Asturias has done it all and have to do it completely differently. So there you are. So Joyce and Beckett, Asturias and Monterroso. But with Asturias, what happened is that you have this explosion of language. And what kind of language? A Mayan language. If you read Asturias today, I can guarantee you that 30% of the language is not listed in the RAE, in the Real Academia de la Lengua Española. Talking about dictionaries, that will be another conference about the ideologies behind dictionaries. But many of the words that he uses, because he uses Maya words and things, and the musicality of it. So the boom starts with him. Why it starts with him? Why it makes it a kind of, because everybody says, oh, that person should be in the boom. No, the boom starts with him, and the boom finishes with somebody called Augusto Roa Bastos with a novel which is about dictatorship, Yo el Supremo. That novel, Yo el Supremo, superb book also, difficult to read, as difficult as Señor Presidente, has parallels with Yo el Supremo. Basically, Roa Bastos read Señor Presidente, say, I can do this. What does Asturias does? He created Guatemalan literature, so to speak, modern literature. There you are. And Roa Bastos does the same with Paraguay. There was no literature in Paraguay. Of course there were, but I said Paraguayan writer that people will read it in modern times is Augusto Roa Bastos. But without Señor Presidente, you will not have Yo el Supremo. The books start in the same way with a un panfleto, a kind of an announcement nailed to a cathedral. In the case of Miguel Ángel Asturias, the priest, who is illiterate, analfabeto, take the sign down, because he knows to take that sign down, and he get arrested for an act of rebellion against the Señor Presidente. The other thing to say about why he's fundamentally the creator of the beginner of so many things, including the magic realism and the boom. I'm talking about the literary boom in Latin America. Is this? The boom was a political and cultural project. What was the project? To put Latin America in the cultural map of the world. That was it. So you take Joyce, say, okay, we're gonna write like this guy, this Irish guy who's writing this fantastic book. Why not? Let's do it. It's again inspired, and it's an act of rebellion. In which way? Against forgetfulness, against cultural colonization. It's about saying, wait a moment, we got these people, Mayan people, and they have a culture. They have a novel, and that was an idea that very much Asturias said. There are novels, there are narratives equivalent to the novels within the Mayan people, and they can be rescued. So there's a cultural project. There are books which are difficult to read. They are not easy to read. I just wonder how many of you go and read 100 Years of Solitude, Yo Supremo, Señor Presidente, or Hombres de Maize. It's an enterprise. It's an enterprise. No, it's not easy reading. This is not Jane Austen, okay? This is not Jane Austen by any means. Completely different. Okay, this talk about identity, it's about culture, it's about everything, and that's the other thing. It's all encompassing. It's an universality where you aspire to be universal. Where I had to read in Señor Presidente, they talk about Kant and Schopenhauer and things as a joke, as a sort of kind of critique of society. And that's the other thing. They are very critical books. And the other thing is this: you are creating a style that, for the first time, the Europeans copy us. From magic realism onwards, the Europeans, they said, "Oh, well, we have created a style in which we are not copying them; they are copying us," and that's very, very important. Now, the mistake that many Europeans think is that everything's magic realism. Of course not. But with Asturias, it is. And Asturias stuck to it. It stuck to the style of, the mythical and stuff in all his books, even in the books that he wrote in the 1950s, in the 1950s to 60s, which was about the exploitation of banana plantains in Latin America, and particularly in Guatemala. But he has all the components. He has the template. He said, look, this is the way to do it. They copy it. And there's something else. When you create a literal movement, and then the literal movement obviously needs the young bloods, the young guns. So the young guns have to kill the predecessor. Asturias was the figure in which they have to commit the parricide. Basically, people like Garcia Marquez, people like Vargas Llosa, people like Carlos Fuentes, not so much Cortázar. Cortázar was was so ideologue at that time. They actually decided we are going to go against Asturias. In certain ways, they criticize it, but they copy him completely. And there is a kind of clear connection in Latin American literature, in the canon, because we can talk about a canon of Latin American literature, and a canon that probably doesn't start with him necessarily. It starts with Rubén Darío. You start with the poets, because you need the poets first, that you need the prose writers. But if you read Asturias, and I will invite you to read Asturias, you will find how poetic his prose is. It's pure poetry all the time. It's joyful, it's phonic, it's polyphonic. That's the other thing about the novels. You got many people talking, who is this character? Characters appear out of the blue here and there, and then you try to follow it, you know. But you need to get into these stories about how people talk, the reaction, the people's in power, the people dispossessed, the political corruption, the humor, the black consistent humor. And that's something, for example, if you read something like Señor Presidente and you read Joel Supremo, what you have is a sustained critique of a system. A critique that, for example, you want that sustained critique throughout a book of something shorter, easier book to read, Crónica de una muerte anunciada. What is the critique against patriarchalism, which you could argue is the main theme of Gabriel Garcia Marquez literature, patriarchalism, a critique of patriarchalism, and sustained critique about the hypocrisy of the church as an institution and the moral corruptions of society, which is basically is ignorant, poor, and depending on basically on social status. You got all that stuff in Asturias. You got it all the time. So he gives to them, and then they have to say, well, we have to get rid of him, not rid of him, but we have to overcome him. We have to take him and do something different. And they did. They actually did. Ironically, the year when Miguel Ángel Asturias was given the Nobel Prize is the same year that Gabriel Garcia Marquez publishes 100 Years of Solitude. Call it a coincidence? Yes, a big coincidence. 1967, he gets the Nobel Prize. The second Latin American to get the Nobel Prize. And 100 Years of Solitude is published. That would become like the Quixote. It's just sold so much. So in 3 years' time, he has obliterated Asturias. Everybody's reading Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Nobody's reading Asturias. Why to read Asturias? I'm going to read 100 Years of Solitude. So there was a dispute. And Asturias accused Gabriel Garcia Marquez of creating a vile copy of the absolute novel of Balzac, which I haven't read, so I don't know. If anybody has read the absolute novel, please let me know. What do you think about it? Perhaps later on. So that was the accusation. Oh, he's copying Balzac. I don't know. Marquez copying Balzac, very unlikely. But that was the environment in which happening. Okay, so you got with Asturias the language renovation. You got the ambition to write a novel which is polyphonic. You got the recreation of a society that, if he does not represent, he doesn't do it, somehow might disappear, or not might disappear, but even diminish more culturally. because this is the whole thing about the novel, and particularly the Latin American novels. And you have to understand as a Latin American. If you are Latin American, you probably will understand this. It's an act of resistance. This novel has been an act of resistance against what? Against political corruption, against forgetfulness, against colonial imperialism, against all that sort of stuff that affect a country like Latin America, which is very relevant nowadays. If you read Señor Presidente, I'm going to get Alan to read something else, and you read the news nowadays, you laugh with that painful laughter at the same time what's thing happen. So it's more relevant than ever, that kind of thing. So you think that no, this is doesn't tell us anything at all. It's telling us all the time new things. So you got a situation in which you need to go back and revisit those work, and I will invite you to do that. Why? You become a better person by just doing so. Simply like, well, honestly, but this is the thing. And the novels, the Latin American novels and the boom, the particular novels of the booms are difficult novels. They are no easy novels. They are chunky, 500, 600 pages, and they are ambitious. It's an enterprise to read them, as I say. It's not like reading Jane Austen or, I don't know, Corín Tellado, that kind of stuff. But, so you have to immerse yourself in that. So let's talk about a little bit how the progression went. The progression starts with the anthropological approach of Asturias, and how he does it. He basically studied with a guy, with the anthropologist in France at Sorbonne University, who translated the Popol Vuh. At the same time that he actually noticed that Ulysses has happened. He read Ulysses in French because one of the first translations, and it was in the translation in which participated. James Joyce actually supervised. I got the name of the translator because I didn't remember that. But participated. So he reads the entire of Ulysses, something that Jorge Luis Borges never did. Although he writes about Ulysses. He gave conference in Buenos Aires about Ulysses. He translated the last page of Ulysses from English into Spanish, and it's the thing that most people only read from Ulysses. Whereas with Asturias, you know that he has read the entire book and digested properly, seeing, okay, this is what we can do. Now, there's something else happening that perhaps people don't realize it. There's another novel written by an Englishman, D.H. Lawrence, published in 2026. It's called The Plumed Serpent, and it's a political mythological novel. I don't know if anybody has read D.H. Lawrence. It's the Lady Chatterley's lover, famous here for the censorship and stuff like that. If you read that novel, it's quite interesting because it's the contrast between Western civilization trying to understand the mythology of Mexico. Mexico was a fascination for Europeans. André Breton was there. And that's the other thing, because Asturias is not only absorbing things like Ulysses, he's absorbing the surrealism, the French surrealism, and that's very important. But if the French surrealism is something about rationality and, automatic writing, stuff like that, some gimmicks. For Latin Americans, wasn't like that. For Asturias, wasn't like that. They take, and this happens always with avant-garde movements, the best surrealists are not the French, are the Spaniards and the Latin Americans. Buñuel, Dalí, Asturias. These are the best surrealists. No, the Spaniards. Breton, I don't know. I mean, some people here, Jason, probably have a different opinion. But the real exploitation of surrealism and the possibilities of realism happened with people like Asturias. He recognized it and he did it. Alejo Carpentier happens that Men of Maize is published at the same year of the Siglo de las Luces, de Alejo Carpentier, and they talk about magic realism. The approach is slightly different, but it's at the same years, and they are friends. One is Cuban, the other one is Guatemalan, and there's another one is the Venezuelan Arturo Usla Pietri that nobody remembers nowadays, but it was very important in the 40s and the 50s. Venezuela, and the first person to coin the sentence magic realism. No lo real maravilloso, sino magic realism was him. So he was very much part of that. So he takes D.H. Lawrence, and he said, wait a moment, the Europeans are paying attention to us, but they're kind of appropriating, they're doing the interpretation. We have to do our own interpretation. We have to do it ourselves. And it's an enterprise. And it's an enterprise to his entire life, and he did it. And the three books that I have read, of Asturias, because I said I'm not an expert, are the three books that I would recommend you start with, and in that order, like Ulysses, like Joyce Lynn Dubliners, Portrait of an Artist as a Young Artist, and then Ulysses. You could start with Leyendas de Guatemala. Easy, nice translations in English, shorter, interesting, mythical things like that. We're going to read a little bit of that. Obviously, he's actually anticipating the European anthropologists, the French who went to Brazil and said, "Oh yes, what these Indians do is meaningful. It's also part of the civilization." Perhaps with the Bon Savage that Rousseau said, but years later. But it is basically, as we said, no, 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 no. We don't need the Europeans to do it. We are going to do it ourselves. That's the plan. We do it ourselves. So he does that, Leyendas of Guatemala, but this is the interesting thing. At the same time, he's writing Señor Presidente. And that's the book that took him about 10 years to write. 10 years to write. By comparison, Yo el Supremo, the Augusto Rabazos, took him 7 years to write. 7 years to write, 5 years to write 100 Years of Solitude. These are books that takes people time to do. And he basically said, okay, he doesn't publish Señor Presidente because there are problems, there's dictatorships going on and repression in Guatemala. So he published much later in the year 1943. 10 years after finish the book, it gets published. Where does it get published? In Argentina. That's the other thing. It's in Argentina where they publish their books. But who benefits enormously from the Latin American boom? The Spaniards, the Catalans publishing houses, and who are winning Franco. Franco is in power, and the Spaniards are publishing books against dictators, against things when Franco been in power. Yeah, that's interesting, that kind of stuff. But there you are. Because what? Because the Spanish publishing houses started to become bigger, and nowadays, in fact, they dominated. But Argentina, particularly Losada, Alianza Editorial, were the main places to publish. Losada publishes Asturias. The same with 100 Years of Solitude was Sudamericana, wasn't it? No, Fondo de Cultura is in Mexico, but no, I don't remember who published 100 Years of Solitude. I think, huh? Sudamericanas, yes, thank you, fine, yes. So but those are publishing house in Argentina. So it is their centers. And you write these books when Latin America start to expand, when Latin America start to become more sort of kind of urbanized. Literacy started to improve. And this is the other thing. You publish in countries where there are problems, but you don't have dictatorships. Because one of the things that first things happen with dictators is they kill the novel. The dictators like the cinema, but they don't like the novel because the novel is much more critical. Think for once the Russian novels after the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. Think about the good Russian novels of the 20th century. You might come to Master and Margarita is before the revolution. Then you got, Dr. Shivago perhaps in the 50s, and then you got Solzhenitsyn with, the Gulag's kind of testimonies. But there's no Russian novel per se. Why? The same with Cuba. The same with Cuba. The Cuban Revolution arrived. Where are the Cuban novels? The only Cuban novel has been published beside Cuba was Paradiso by Lezama Liber. And that novel is a very baroque novel. It's long and it doesn't go anywhere. To be quiet, it doesn't go anywhere. But the novels which actually were produced in Cuba or by Cuban writers in exile. And that's another characteristic of the boom, the exile. They have to write outside their countries. Gabriel Garcia Marquez wrote 100 Years of Solitude in Mexico, not in Colombia. If he were in Colombia, he wouldn't have written the book. He has to go to Mexico to do it. And why? Because of Asturias. But you know what? Because the first person who followed Asturias' example with Men of Maize was Juan Rulfo y Pedro Páramo. And I will invite you to read that book because it's one of the greatest books written in Latin America's literature. That's short, difficult, yes, fragments, but like this, you read it in one afternoon. But it's an amazing book. No need to flex it now, which is not a bad production if you're not against Netflix and film productions of those books. But then there's a real connection. You got Men of Maize, you got Juan Rulfo, Pedro Páramo, and then 100 Years of Solitude. Asturias, 1949. Rulfo, 1955. 100 Years of Solitude, 1967. So you got that period of time. But Marquez said that Marquez was a liar all the time, obviously. Well, no liar, un exagerador. And he said, "Oh, I know that novel by heart, probably." An exaggeration is something that Asturias uses all the time, and he uses it as a kind of as a sort of kind of humoristic things. But he starts is this so many things that you see when you read the other books. What I'm trying to say to you is that you read all the big Latin American novels. That's Asturias. That's Asturias. That's Asturias. Always. Even think Miguel Garcia Marquez, who actually said no, I didn't copy Asturias. He did. So that's the reality. The other thing to say is this. Um, it is a way, as I say, it's a way of defense, but it's also a social critique. And this is the interesting thing with Asturias. Particularly if you read Men of Maize, with Señor Presidente, you got it too. It's about he's not an ideologue, and we were talking with Adam about this. If you read a novel like El Otoño y el Patriarca, The Autumn of the Patriarch by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, you find this sort of kind of la masa de la gente, the people. That people in certain ways is a sort of kind of anomalous things. Who are the people? Like the presidents, the American people, the British people, politicians talk in those terms. The British people have spoken. Who are the British people who spoke? We are defending American people. Who are the American people? Who are these people? It's undefinable. And the whole thing about identity, and I'm going to finish with the whole thing about identity in a second, but it's about with Men of Maize, you got the representation of the poor peasants, Mayan Indians. He doesn't idealize them. He doesn't present it as, oh my God, superior human beings in a moral thing. No, they are corrupt, they are stupid, they steal, they lie, the same as everybody else, the same as us. They are not moral superior to the West. Yeah, it's not that the West is superior at all. We know that. No, but he doesn't present it like, oh my goodness, these people are, idealize them. He presents them in a sort of kind of real way. The same with Señor Presidente. Señor Presidente is a novel which has one of the characteristics of the Latin American novel, violence. Is very, very violent. It's violence all around. But in the middle of the story, in the middle of the book, there's this love story. Love story what? Juan Cara de Ángel is the name. Juan Cara de Ángel is el favorito del presidente, the favorite man of the president. And basically what happened is that he wants to get rid of some generals, so he accused one general to be a traitor. I said, get rid of the general, and asked him to take the daughter away. When Juan Cara de Ángel take the daughter away called Camila, he falls in love with Camila. And there's this very beautiful love story in the middle of this mess. It's amazing. But some of the chapters, there's one chapter in particular in which they took a woman and they tortured her. It's just gruesome, absolutely gruesome. I'm not going to detail, but be prepared. Again, no easy reading. Basically, it's a woman who gets tortured, and the baby's taken with her, and she's begging the captors and the torturers to let her feed the baby. You know what the torturers do? They put lime in her breast so she cannot feed the baby, and all that sort of stuff. But this it's kind of violence, and violence is a constant of some of the Latin American boom novels. Always, Casa Verde, the novel about the Amazon by Vargas Llosa, violence. The Vortex, that's another book that I have to mention. The Vortex, which last year granted 100 years of publication. Jose Eustacio Rivera, that's another of the books that Asturias pay attention to, because The Vortex is a very violent novel about the exploitation, the raw exploitation of Latin America and the Amazonian. Jose Eustacio Rivera, an amazing book, polyphonic, many people. But the interesting thing is this, and it's something that Asturias does in many ways. Nature speaks. The Amazon speaks in that novel. The Amazon is one of the characters of the novel. The same happened with the landscape in Men of Maize. You are traveling Guatemala. Her Excellency Tony, have you been to Guatemala? Sadly, I haven't. And now I feel like I need to go, because the description he does of Guatemala, the food, the animals, the plants, amazing. I was looking at the names and all the specific names of plants of Guatemala. He's doing a topographic description of the landscape, with animals, with sounds, with people, with everything. It's all encapsulated. That's not easy to do. That takes courage, determination, and it's a very peculiar, how can I say, an organized way of doing it. Even if the novel is not organized, he's not making it easier for you. And why he does it? He does it to say, well, look, for places like that now, more than 100 years, 125 years after his birth, still talking about him and me inviting you to read the novel. In English, they are very good translation. Men of Maize, if you want to speak Spanish, has been translated by Gerald Martin, which is good. And Señor Presidente, I just bought it today, the new translation, the 2022 by somebody called Francis Patridge, and it's really, really good. I think I'm not going to bore you anymore with that. I'm going to stop there. And I'm going to Alan to read some of the stuff. First, some readings, Alan? Shall we do some readings? Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah, okay, fine. So the first reading comes from Leyendas de Guatemala. Oh, that's true. That's true. Apologies. Can we do the reading and then the video? What do you think? You tell me.
It's okay. It's whatever you want.
Let's do the reading and then the video, shall we? Let's do the video. Yes. Yeah. Is that okay? It's better. I think it's better. Then we, okay. The first reading is from Leyendas de Guatemala, and it's about a mythic figure, a dog, and it's a very Central American dog. So we are towards the end of one of the pieces, of the first pieces in the book. Very simple. Okay, Alan. Thank you, Alan.
Yeah, the legend. Well, pleasure to be here, Mario. Woody? Yeah, good. So I'm going to read the legend of Cadejo. But when his braid fell, it was no longer a braid. It moved, undulated on the little bed of communion wafers scattered on the floor. The poppy man searched for the light. Tears trembled on his eyelashes, like the last flickering flames on the coal of a dying match. He slid down the surface of the wall, his breath buried deep, without disturbing the shadows, without making a sound, yearning to reach the flame he believed to be his salvation. Soon, his measured pace dissolved into a terrifying flight. The headless reptile left the sacred litter of communion wafers and headed towards him. It slithered beneath his feet, like the black blood of a dead animal, and suddenly, just as he was about to reach the light, it leaped with rattles of water flowing freely and lightly, coiling like a whip around the candle, which made it weep until it was consumed, for the soul of the one who was extinguished with it forever. And so, the poppy man reached eternity, for whom the cacti still weep white tears. The demon had passed like a breath through the braid which, when the candle flame died, fell to the inert floor, and, at midnight, transformed into a long animal, twice the length of a ram by the full moon, the size of a weeping willow by the new moon. With goat's hooves, rabbit's ears, and the lance of a bat, the poppy man dragged to hell the black braid of the novice, who would one day become Mother Elvira of San Francisco. And thus the Cadejo is born, while she dreamed amidst the smiles of angels, kneeling in her cell with the lily and the mystic lamb.
The mythical figure that protects its people, El Cadejo, is very Central American. Doesn't exist in Colombia, doesn't exist in Argentina, obviously in Peru, doesn't exist, I don't believe. We can talk about our Peruvian friends later on. But the second one is an interesting one. It's an excerpt from Men of Maize, and it's about the one of the witches. And the idea is this, and this idea that he developed as a writer. These people have a novel. He have stories similar to novels to be told. So it's about when do you tell the story and what kind of story? And it's a story that is new or is old, and it's an excerpt from Men of Maize.
Yet it is civilized men who are the knights of destruction. There's something magnificent in the epic of these pirates who enslave their peons, exploit the Indian, and battle against the jungle. Trampled by misfortune, they hurl themselves from the anonymity of the cities into desert zones, looking for any way out of their sterile existence. The rubber traders in Colombia destroy millions of trees every year. In Venezuela, the balata has disappeared. In this way, they are busy defrauding future generations.
Thank you. And just to finalize the humor, he is really, really funny. It's the ha 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 laughter. A bit like the rule for laughter, but that laughter you don't need to cry. Are you supposed to cry here or to laugh? But you will see some similar. I know. Before that, we got the thing about at the end about culture. This universal thing. So he talks about the myths. So the main of Maize again, no, for Señor Presidente, is about the myths, about the comparison between myths, and in this case the German myths, compared to the Mayan Indian myths of Central America. This is from Men of Maize towards the end of the book.
The Bavarian replied that this way of thinking was absolutely materialistic. And materialism is absurd, because the material is nothing more than matter in a fleeting form. What would become of Germany without its legends? Where did the German language draw the best of its spirit? Did not the primal substances of the dark beings flow from them? Have I not revealed the emptiness of all that has limits, the contemplation of the infinite? Without Hoffmann's fantastic tales, Doña Elda accepted that the legends of Germany were true, but not those of that poor place of true Indians and shod, louse-ridden Ladinos. With his finger, as with the barrel of a pistol, Don de Feric pointed at his wife's chest, accusing her of having a European mentality. Europeans are stupid. They think that only Europe has ever existed, and that anything that isn't Europe might be interesting as an exotic plant, but it doesn't exist.
As you can tell, is this idea, the exoticism. What is no European is exotic. Orient is exotic. Latin American, we are the exotic cousins of the Europeans, that kind of things. We're going to finish with the best thing. This is from Señor Presidente. This first part is a chapter that he's back, his correspondence, the kind of letters he gets every day. So, and there are quite a few. It's a short chapter, but it's quite heterogeneous. The letters that Señor Presidente gets. It's interesting, the Señor Presidente, because the guy appears only twice or three times, I remember, in the novel. But his presence is ominous. He's always lurking in the background, but he's never, he doesn't appear in the novel that often. But he's looking at his correspondence, and we mark some of them for you to read out. Yeah, have a go.
Thank you. Soledad Belmares, resident in this town, states that she now has nothing to eat because she's come to the end of her resources, and since she is a stranger and unknown here, no one will lend her money. That in these circumstances she begs the president to set her son, Manuel Belmares H., and her brother-in-law, Federico Orneros P., at liberty. The minister of her country can certify that they are not involved in politics, but only came here to earn their living by honest work, their sole offence having been that they accepted a recommendation from General Eusebio Canales to assist them to get work at the railway station. Juan Antonio Maris thanks the president for the interest he was so kind as to show him in getting his doctors to look after him. He's now ready again for service and begs permission to come to the capital to attend to various matters arising from his special knowledge of the political activities of Abel Carvajal, the lawyer. Alfredo Toledano of this town states that as he suffers from insomnia and never goes to sleep till late, he surprised one of the president's friends, Miguel Ángel Asturias, knocking violently on the door of the house of Don Juan Canales, a brother of the general of the same name who was always criticizing the government. He is informing the president in case it may be of interest. Casimiro Rebecca Luna says that he will shortly have completed 2.5 years detention in the second police station, that as he is poor and has no relatives to intercede on his behalf, he begs the president to be so good as to order him to be set at liberty. That the offence of which he's accused is that of having removed the announcement of the president's mother's anniversary from the door of the church where he's sacristan, on the instigation of enemies of the government, that it is not certain that he did so, and that if he did, it was because he mistook it for another notice, since he cannot read.
You are right. And fine. And there he finished in this one chapter when the priest, the three of them are present, and because he was illiterate and took the notice down, to commemorate the birthday of the president's mother. He finished in prison and years in prison. The last one is a bit longer, but it's quite interesting. It's about the poet praising the president, something that we might see in the media nowadays in many countries around the world. Do you have that one, Alan? Yes? Yes. Fine, have a go. Yeah.
Citizens, merely by uttering the name of the President of the Republic, we shed light from the torch of peace upon those sacred interests of a nation which, under his wise rule, has conquered and will go on conquering the inestimable benefits of progress in every sphere and of order in every form of progress. As free citizens, conscious of our obligation to watch over our own destiny, which is also that of the nation, and as men of goodwill and enemies of anarchy, we hereby proclaim that the welfare of the Republic depends upon the re-election of our illustrious mandatory and on nothing else but his re-election. Why hazard the ship of state in unknown waters, when we have at its head at present the most accomplished statesman of our day, whom history will salute as a great man among great men, a wise man among the wise, a liberal, a thinker, and a democrat? Even to imagine any other than him in this high office amounts to an attempt upon the destiny of the nation, which is our own destiny. And whoever dares to do so, if any such there be, deserves to be shut up as a dangerous lunatic, or, if he is not mad, tried as a traitor to his country according to the law. Fellow citizens, the ballot boxes are waiting. Vote for our candidate, who will be re-elected by the people. The reading aloud of this notice aroused universal enthusiasm in the bar. There were shouts and applause, and in answer to a general demand, a carelessly dressed man with long black hair and steely eyes got up to speak. Patriots, I think as a poet, but I speak as a patriotic citizen. A poet means a man who invented the sky, You must listen, therefore, to a disorganized harangue from the inventor of this useless, beautiful thing we call the sky. With that German, whom the Germans did not understand, no, I do not mean Goethe, Kant or Schopenhauer, wrote of a Superman, he was undoubtedly foretelling the birth in America to Father Cosmos and Mother Nature of the first truly superior man who has ever existed. I'm speaking, gentlemen, of him who excels the dawn in brightness, whom his country has called the well-deserving of the chief of the party and protector of studious youth. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, well, that's it. We're gonna see him speaking in Spanish. We're talking about his own voice, which is the first time I listened to him speaking. So we got a short video, 5 minutes.
Está pasando toda nuestra civilización de lo que se llama una cultura lineal a una cultura visual. Estamos pasando de Gutenberg a la televisión. Y la gente que nos ocupamos de estos asuntos, pues ahora tenemos que enfrentarnos a una nueva realidad, a la imagen, ya no a la palabra. El señor presidente en diferentes épocas ha sido propuesto para llevarlo al cine, pero generalmente es un problema desde el punto de vista político. Ya en una época, Duvivier, el gran metteur en scène francés, preparó todo el trabajo y firmamos contrato y iba a hacerse en una coproducción francesa y mexicana. En el momento de irse a filmar, de firmarse los contratos, dijeron que no era posible porque en la América Latina, después del presidente Roosevelt, después de la guerra, en lugar de venir gobiernos democráticos, estaban instalando en todas partes gobiernos dictatoriales, señores presidentes, y que en ese caso no iba a haber dónde vender la película. Y él ya no hizo la película. Después otros grandes metteurs en scène han querido hacerla, pero siempre se ha tropezado con el problema político. El cine está llamado a jugar un papel sumamente importante. Podemos decir que es un arte todavía en pañales, a pesar de todo lo que creemos que ha avanzado. Actualmente la radio juega ya un papel en los países que llaman de subdesarrollados. En el tercer mundo los transitores están permitiendo a una gran cantidad de gente, muchas veces analfabeta o pobre que no tiene para comprar libros ni periódicos, ilustrarse por medio del transitor. Oyen constantemente todo lo que se dice y están al tanto y al cabo de cuánto hay en el mundo. Yo creo que el cine y sobre todo la televisión en el futuro permitirán esta labor educativa. Socialmente el cine es un elemento tan importante que lo podemos medir por la censura. Generalmente se censuran aquellas películas que van a influir en la masa y ya los regímenes políticos pues muchas veces temen que ciertas películas puedan despertar en la masa ideas de libertad, ideas de justicia, y todo lo que en una pantalla se puede ver.
Political problems of taking Señor Presidente as a film version. Remember that these novels were written during the Cold War, right in the middle of the Cold War. They were not written in a sort of kind of, easy kind of political landscape. All the novels, particularly the novels of the Boone and him, the novels that he was writing, were in the middle of the Cold War. A Cold War that, for all matter and purposes, still remains with us in one way or another. Okay? Thank you. That's all. Thank you.